So episode 11 of One Punch Man just dropped, and it's pretty okay, all things considered. So let's go in and spot every single difference between it and its manga. This is very similar to the scene to the original manga, the one Murata retconned later down the line. However, that scene doesn't take place until much later in the manga. So to have it here straight away is quite odd, especially because in the canon version of the manga, Saitama is actually with Child Emperor and the kid here. And Saitama is partially responsible for why they get out so quickly. So it makes sense that they get out quickly. However, in the pre-retcon version, Saitama isn't there. So it takes them a good while to make it to the surface. So they're using the pacing from the most recent version of the manga and the structure of the previous version. So although there's a lot of differences here, it really doesn't actually affect the main outcome, and they have a nice set of dialogue between the S-class heroes showing Child Emperor the respect he rightly deserves because they've been stomping on him all season. When Child Emperor reaches the surface with the kid, it's actually a direct pull from the cover of the original volume of chapter 111, significantly further ahead than the source material at this point. Instead of having this dialogue in the wide pan, you're supposed to have a close-up of the two characters saying it, and then a different sort of close-up for Child Emperor instead of the close-up neon shot here. And there's not much else to say for this rest of this sequence because everything is basically one-to-one with the manga. Alright, it's an anime, should have a bit more, but it doesn't. It's very loyal to the source material. Basically, all you can really say about it. The Atomic Samurai versus Super S fight is really close to the retconned original manga, like the first one. There's a lot of missing panels here and there. I will mark a difference for each one. I won't necessarily show them, but I'll mark a difference for each one. I have them counted in my notes. Instead of this weird cactus shape that Super S's head has in the anime, instead in the pre-retconned manga, he has a load of his heads lined up in a straight line, which when he cuts it, it gives like a proper Fruit Ninja vibe. But however, in the redrawed version, it's closer to this anime's interpretation of the original source. When Super S grows into that really weird bulbous shape and Atomic Samurai slashes through him 1,000 times, in the original source of the manga, it's this panel here where Atomic Samurai is in the bottom left and all the cut up pieces of Super S are floating above him. And then they grow a dot that turns into a face and turn into even more Black S. But in the anime, he cuts them all up into dust, and then we just see these shapes with circles on them that, to be honest, is very unclear as to what they are. But they do, however, turn into those monsters. It's just that initial cut frame that's different, and the rest of it is actually pretty accurate. When he cuts up all those tiny Super S's, they're supposed to immediately duplicate again, and then he has to cut them all down again. However, they don't show him reforming in the anime for the second time, instead cutting straight to them all just being back, so you can assume that they've reformed but you just don't know it, and he cuts through all of those guys again. And the shot that they use for him cutting them all up is also different than it is in the manga. However, all of these differences are correct in the retcon version of the manga. They're all present. They're different for sure, but they are correct. So this is what I was talking about, where we have this amalgamation of both versions. They're taking parts they like from the original and adding in parts that they like from the new version. It makes it very difficult to do a video like this, by the way. So that's when this shot comes in, where he's slashing up all the Super S's over the horde of Super S's coming in. Which, by the way, chef's kiss. Genuinely so well done here in the anime. They skip over this close-up of Black S, and I think it genuinely adds a lot. And the main difference in the ending of this fight is that the close-up of when Atomic Samurai pulls off that trump card, we're supposed to see close-up reaction images, or at least animation in it, just a close-up reaction of Super S and all his clones looking up at their impending doom. So moving on to the Homeless Emperor versus Zombie Man section of the episode. Once again, I'm going to add to the counter how many panels they didn't adapt in both versions of the manga. So the initial blast that Homeless Emperor shoots off is supposed to be an adaptation of the canon manga, but it doesn't show the same impact as that manga has. See, the destruction level of Homeless Emperor's attack in the canon manga is unbelievably huge. Zombie Man is in a corridor and Homeless Emperor blows him into another room with this monumental nuke of a blast. However, the scale of the explosion in the anime doesn't really match that. See, they're already in the room, so it's just a big empty room that they're blasting in. So the explosion is a different style and the size is similar. In terms of shot compositing and what it's actually supposed to be probably adapting is the source material at the minute, the canon source material. The censorship of Zombie Man is worse than ever in this episode. It is horrific. So not only am I putting a number on the counter for each time they miss a panel, there's also going to be one there for every instance of censorship. However, I would like to sing some praises. Homeless Emperor is great. Okay, the sound effects that they use for his, magic is really cool, honestly. And the movement of those orbs so far has been decent. I wish there was a little more movement, especially when he was walking there, but regardless, pretty okay. Now, Zombie Man pulling a gun out of his chest is so fire, okay? But when he's reaching into a black abyss and pulls out a gun that doesn't even, have much blood on it, it doesn't make much sense at all. And the panel of Zombie Man shooting that gun and seeing blood come out of every orifice of the gun because it's been inside him is so cinematic. However, that is completely lacking in the anime. Here, Zombie Man is on fire. He's not supposed to be on fire. He's supposed to be charred, like charcoal, right? And there's supposed to be steam coming off his burnt flesh. Look at his figure. I know people who'd kill for that figure. In the anime, he's just a guy. He's just a silhouette of a guy. He's Johnny Storm all of a sudden. But in that manga, he is genuinely a walking corpse. Barely a man, more of a skeleton than anything else. Actively unable to communicate because his face doesn't exist. Having his face grow in as the scene plays out, only being able to talk once he has lips. None of that's present in the anime. He's just Johnny Blaze, Mr. the Storm. We also miss a load of dynamic angles for his dialogue, which is criminal. He starts talking about boxer pants and how he needs to wear super boxer pants so his cock doesn't show when he fights. That's not in the manga. I don't know where the hell they pulled that crap from. Instead, in the manga, he's just like, what's all this magic you're using? It's kind of bullshit and unfair. Something that I think is genuinely important is when he's talking about, oh, you want to know about my power. In the manga, they show his hand open as he controls one of these magic orbs floating around. It's important because, hey, we're talking about my magic. Let's show my magic while we talk to break up this scene. Instead, they just hold that angle and then move past it and show this close-up. That one is just thematically important, so I thought I'd mention it. Now, for this backstory of Homeless Emperor, they basically stick one-to-one with the manga. This shot here is different. This world orb shot for some reason. It's kind of really weird. It's like we're on Halo, but no, that isn't in the manga. And then suddenly, it's no longer the canon manga. And there's a good reason for that. See, they start to adapt the retconned manga halfway through this section of story, right through this scene, because of how dark the retconned manga is. See, they just show who we know as God very differently than the version that's in the manga, by the way. In the manga, webcomic, and retconned manga, all of them, he's basically a load of squiggly lines that shapes out the form of a man. There's two versions of this. One that's PG, where Homeless Emperor just has shopping and he came across God, and another where he's hanging a noose to commit rope, and as he opens it to insert his head, God appears between the rope. Cinematically, chef's kiss. However, I assume Bandai Namco wants to sell more toys, and I don't think a Homeless Emperor rope toy would sell very well to kids. So that's the second fight done. There's a lot of fights in this episode, holy bagazoli the moly. So something I will say right off the bat into this next fight, the opening goes animation wise unreasonably hard, especially considering they gave this much animation to just two jobbers. Now, to be fair, I like these two jobbers. I like how one's some form of traditional sexy demon lady who do the big lightning with the drum, which by the way goes hard in terms of, sound design. She goes and then lightning comes out. And then I also just quite like the catfish combo. I like that these are jobbers that we've seen in the past actually dish out some damage so that we can have a sort of power scaling reference for Puri-Puri Prisoner, who, by the way, is one of my favorite characters in this show, mainly just because he's super gay, and that's epic, and two, he's so funny. Oh, and just to remind you, this is another section, and I will be marking a difference for every panel that they didn't adapt from the manga, which will be added now. On with the fight. So the first big major difference, that those two characters I mentioned before have this really harrowing moment where now we've had added context from this panel that they're in a relationship. They love each other. And the catfish is holding on for dear life, but also holding on to his beloved. They lose grip of one another. She flies into his trunk and he consumes her. And the actual rage and sorrow coming from the catfish is actually quite saddening and lends a level of emotional depth to Puri-Puri Prisoner's, whole stick about love, right? Because in terms of the anime, this comes off as a joke. He sees a lot of his enemies get consumed and he says, you truly have no love for your allies, do you? But with the added context of the removed material, that hits 100 times harder. Something I'll add is that in the anime, Puri-Puri Prisoner looks so whack here. Like, his anatomy just doesn't work out in any capacity at all. The ice that is actually supposed to be on his shoulder visibly isn't on his shoulder. It just looks like it's a part of the ice in the background right behind it. The part where the elephant shoots off that blast falls so short in the anime. The sound design really lets it down. Although the visuals aren't great either, but in that manga, that shot, that explosion is so impactful and should have sound design to reflect that, rather than just sounding like some form of like electricity charge. It doesn't even have like an explosion. The elephant has like 9 elements shooting out in this like destructive wave. It should sound more impactful. Next up is when Puri-Puri Prisoner resonates with the wall and it crumbles to dust. In the manga, there is so much more detail in how it falls and crumbles, and in the anime, the hole that's left behind is just this black hole that makes the shot look really flat. That shot of when the camera is zooming around Puri-Puri Prisoner peak, but the transition into the wings just does not hit. It's so close to being fire, but that cut sucks, man. But the sequence of that attack was pretty damn good. Although they didn't add these characters, they still include them running away from Puri-Puri Prisoner, abandoning Gero Gero. For whatever reason, they just kept this in, even though it doesn't add any emotional or thematic context whatsoever. Once again, there's a level of censorship here when the prisoners are beating down on Puri-Puri Prisoner. We're supposed to see that they are going bloody hard. There is cracks, there is blood. This is pure, unadulterated hate that they are leveling down on him. But in the anime, the impacts feel a bit dull. Once again, the sounds just don't really match the genuine like hate that's being put down right now. And I really think that that panel of him crying, they need to be thick tears. They need to be chunky, not just like white streaks. I feel like they need to be like almost a viscous liquid coming down his face because he loves them so much. Scratch, blood, good. Punching, blood, bad. Now, personally, I adore that they have him land in this pose, ass up. It's just, however, there isn't blood falling with him as he falls, which is not cinema. For once, a gory part is just 1-to-1 with the anime. There's blood, it's coming out at the same viscosity and like volume as in the manga. Good. Pretty good job. There needs to be more hair. In the manga, there is way more hair. But there is something charming about only having 7 hairs come out of his pits. I don't know why I think that's the case. I just do. Okay, big, major issue. So first off, I'd like to say, very surprised with how good the Puri-Puri Prisoner section of this episode is. However, when he's digging through the wall, one, he's missing the ball chained to his leg, and also he's missing a cut in his trousers where you can see his heart undies. And that meant that one of those prisoners was trying to do something. So in the anime, he says that they got caught in the crossfire, which isn't what they say in the manga. In the manga, he's like, I killed them. He takes responsibility for killing his boyfriends. But in the anime, they can't have a hero be accountable for someone's death, so it's caught in the crossfire. It's something that couldn't be helped. However, this shot of Saitama at the end is a anime original. It's not in the retcon manga, and it's not in the official manga. It's just something that they did so Saitama would be in the episode for more than 10 seconds. But that covers all the differences in this episode of One Punch Man. And honestly, it was a pretty phenomenal episode in the case of season 3. It is a below average episode of anime, but it is much better than what we have received in the past. And I was particularly satisfied with the Puri-Puri Prisoner stuff. That honestly was fucking hilarious. We got one episode left in this series of One Punch Man anime versus manga, and I'm working on a video to talk about what is going to happen with the channel moving forward, particularly next month. I have a lot of plans, and I'm going all out.